go. Okay. Tonight we have a special guest. She's a very well-renowned teacher. She also happens to be related to me. It's one thing that makes her really good. This is my daughter, Meredith Walling. And Meredith is a teacher in the Eanes ISD down in the Austin area at Westlake High School. And she is a teacher of students with significant disabilities and has been since the beginning of her career, about, was it 10 years now? Something like that. Okay. And so I asked Meredith if she would join us tonight because she's one of a few, I think, among this group that has actually had experience with this type of student, this type of classroom. Michelle, I don't know what your experience is. Have you worked with kids with significant disabilities?
Yes, that's all I've ever done. And I actually am an independent contractor, and I go in to schools and set up programs for emotionally disturbed and students with autism. Okay.
Then you can speak to some of these issues as well. Meredith's entire experience has been with significant disabilities. Right now, her class is made up of students with autism, and I guess that's your experience as well, Michelle. But many of our, and Jessica, some of your experiences with that population, isn't it? Is it mostly just behavior disorders?
Well, I've done resource and inclusion for the last 6 years.
Okay.
Several students of mine have autism, mostly younger. Last year we had 3 in kindergarten.
Okay. But as we've gone through these last 3 chapters here, I wanted to kind of focus on these 3 issues: inclusion, communication, and behavior issues. And those of you who've got some of that behavior background will really want to chime in on that part. But I wanted to have Meredith chime in about some of her experiences with the students who have the more significant disabilities as it relates to some of these issues. And I'd like for this to be very much a dialogue tonight between all of us. And so let's, if we've got questions that are very particular to Meredith's experience, let's pick her brain. And I want her just to be part of the group tonight and join in with some of her experiences. And I've got a PowerPoint to kind of guide us through our discussion, but I want to delve into some of the realities rather than just the theory behind some of these issues. Talk about what it really means on the gritty side in the classroom part of it. I have been in Washington, D.C. until just a few hours ago. My plane landed at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. I've been up on the Hill the last several days advocating for students with disabilities. So I am tired. Y'all do a lot of talking tonight, okay? And let me rest. But it's been an exciting few days. I did have a little bit of fun while I was there. I went to see Hamilton Friday night at the Kennedy Center, and that was a real treat. And then yesterday I was in the offices of both of our senators, Cruz and Cornyn, and my local representative, Kay Granger, here in the Fort Worth area. And then we had a rally out on the Capitol lawn with Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, who is quite an advocate for special education. And I think he may have political aspirations far beyond the senator's office. He reminds me of a younger Barack Obama. So remember the name Cory Booker. He may be one that we see again in the future. Very, very gregarious, charismatic young senator. But that being said, I've gotten myself a little bit pumped up about special education advocacy this week with 270 other people on the Hill advocating for kids with disabilities. It's been an exciting week. But we'll go ahead and get started now. So I'm going to, let's see, share my screen. And I thought I'd already done that. There we go. Okay, y'all are over to one side. Can you see my PowerPoint now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And all right. Just for a little bit of housekeeping, this week this is week 4. We've got a discussion board going. We'll have a quiz that will open right after this webinar tonight. And then the choice assignment is due this week. The next big assignment will be the research paper. And what I added this week on the Unit 4 list of things is the choices are some of the ideas really for the research topic. And what you can do is choose one of these or something else that's strictly related to kids with more significant disabilities. Anything off of this list or tangential to this, or something that maybe is a passion of yours particularly, be thinking about that, and then just kind of run it by me to make sure that it's something that that gets a final approval, and then we'll go with that. Let me go back there. So here is kind of the driving questions tonight from the 3 chapters that that we had this week. How can we improve approaches to inclusion? That would be Chapter 10's focus. Teaching students with communication difficulties from 11. And how should we go about supporting students with behavioral differences, which was Chapter 12. So let's talk specifically about building those inclusive schools. Think about your experiences, whether you are a general educator or a special educator. And let's think about what your experiences have been on that continuum of inclusion. Have you had good experiences? Have you had more negative experiences? Have you seen general education be open-minded and open-armed to kids with those more significant disabilities? Now, I think we're getting pretty good about including our students with high incidence disabilities, our kids with learning disabilities, our kids with, the most common OHI kinds of things, ADD, ADHD, those kinds of things. Our run-of-the-mill kids with dyslexia and math disabilities and some things like that. But our kids who are more significantly impaired, what are you seeing the inclusive practices in your schools? Are we still back in the 70s and 80s with our mentality about our more significantly impaired students, or are we coming along with that? Any impressions?
I would say that most of the time, with my experience, it has been that the kids can come into any classroom and they're welcome to, but your gen ed teachers are typically very hands-off and just expect the para or whoever is with that student to pretty much take care of that student, which is really disappointing to me because that's not really the idea of an inclusive model. It's not just have a student in a classroom. It's actually interacting and giving them the best experience, as close to as their peers as possible. But I see a couple of teachers that do really good and try, but a lot of times our gen ed teachers really aren't educated on students with severe disabilities. So it's not a matter of not wanting an inclusive environment, but it's truly a lack of knowledge and not knowing what to do or how to do it. So therefore they just teach their class, and then, whoever's with the student takes care of that kiddo.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes there is a fear factor there too, wouldn't you say? Has anyone seen that? A fear of maybe the unknown, a fear of students who are different, who are more significantly impaired.
Well,
Anybody see that?
A reality that I've seen is, and then remember, I'm in a high school setting, teachers being very, this student, he really shouldn't be in here. He should be in your resource class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking students who are not severe at all, where I'm like, no, actually most of my resource class should probably be in here. It's totally, reading this textbook even has kind of led me more toward that most of the students in my class are, I don't know if any of them really are severe like this textbook is talking about.
Right.
And I'm starting to think to myself, now I only see a couple that could really, how do I put this, that are so significantly cognitively behind that they would really warrant a different setting. I think as long as you have the support and the grading and the goals in place, they can make it an inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I've run into.
Good observation, Mark. Anybody else? Meredith? Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, on my campus, our students with more severe cognitive disabilities are included in only like PE and music. They still, though, have separation. They come into the gym, but they stay in the corner, or they come into the music room and they sit in the back of the class. Mm-hmm. They also go into the cafeteria and have lunch with one grade level. I'm not sure which one, but they all go at the same time and they sit at their own table. So it's not really inclusive in my opinion. It's, we're going at the same time with these students, but we're not integrated. We're not including them in the same, situations, the same activities, the same tables. So
I would agree. I see that too.
More parallel than really included. Meredith, what's your experience on the inside of it?
Well, I've seen a lot of different things over the course of the last 10 years, and especially I've taught elementary, middle, and high school, all in the severe range. And so I've definitely seen where the model for the school is to go into PE, art, music, those types of things. And really a huge part of it is getting the buy-in from the general education teachers. And what I find is building relationship with the teachers and the students is absolutely imperative. A lot of times what I will do is I'll invite that teacher to come to my room and get to know them even before they come into their room, so that they have some ownership over that student, and then equip them as much as humanly possible to show how to structure certain times of their day to fit the needs of the students. And really, it's easier than they think it is. And once I kind of showed them, and I said, you're already doing this. You already are structuring, building up another educator and coming from a place of respect instead of a defensive place, I feel like really helps, even though you want to be really defensive of your kids and you want to fight and advocate kind of aggressively. That doesn't always, you catch more bees with honey type of situation. And I really just say, I know you're a compassionate educator. I know you want this student to be a part of your class. And I've got a lot of really great feedback of students, and then the teacher will ask for another one of my students in their inclusion the next year. They say, we love having your students in my class. I found so much positive coming from my other students when your student is in my class. And so at the elementary setting, that was really great, getting in that awareness and acceptance at the earliest level. And then that builds up into the secondary settings where they say, oh yeah, I've always known this student, and they're my friend, and they went to elementary school with me, and they're awesome, and they love cars just like I do. And they see those similarities from a young child age group up into when they're in high school. We're lucky enough at the high school, I had this at the middle school and the high school level, to have peer helpers where they take a class to come be in my class. And you have to apply, and you have to write essays, and you have to get training, and they get grades based on how well they do in the class of peer assistance. And I have just had so many. I mean, I could talk for the next 40 minutes positives from that scenario, and really what it can look a lot of different ways. More like a paraprofessional coming alongside the most fragile, medically fragile student. And then students who are much closer to grade level, we'll just assign a task or an activity to the whole class. And those peer helpers, ideally, you wouldn't be able to tell exactly who is the peer helper, that they are just cooperatively working on a task. And it's really great. I've gone into classes of other teachers that we have a team of 6 at the high school that I'm at. We have a large high school. And I can't always tell who's the peer helper and who's the student enrolled in their modified or alternative class.
So these are kids that are going, these are kids who are special helpers that are going into other general ed classes with them. So they're not coming into your room.
No, they're going into mine.
Okay.
Yeah, they can go into my classroom.
That's a reverse inclusion then.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Do you have any kids that are regular ed kids, general ed kids who are going into other general ed classes with?
Yes, we just started that this year. We just had to make sure that they were advanced peer helper students. So now we have peer assistants. Just like we have English 1, 2, 3, 4, we have peer assistants 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have to be a more advanced peer assistant with that more experience behind your belt. And so they will, and it has to be a class obviously that they're not taking normally.
Yeah.
And a class that they've already taken, already gotten their good grades in. And we've had students go in for health or go in, and it really helps with staffing when we don't have to be in there.
Okay, let me ask the group at large. What have you all seen about on the issue of acceptance of the general ed population of our students who are more significantly impaired when they go into general ed classes? I mean, I think Jessica kind of touched on this a minute ago when she said, more of this parallel kind of lunchtime when we've got them they're in the cafeteria at the same time, but we've got, 2 separate tables. Sometimes I think that acceptance is difficult to push onto students. What can we do to promote that?
From my experience, I'll be honest, I think that students with more significant disabilities or cognitive disabilities, and this might sound really bad, they tend to look different or act different. And so there's some outward reflection that lets other people know that they're different. I feel like, or I've seen, that those students are more accepted by their general education peers than students with like learning disabilities or like you were mentioning earlier, those more frequent OHI, the other disabilities, because they don't look different. Well, they might need extra help, but so the gen ed peers just think that they're lazy or, well, they're just not smart enough or whatever. But the other students who are coming from like a life skills class or a more self-contained environment, I feel like, they might be in a wheelchair, or they might always know that paraprofessional is associated with that student, so they're special. I feel like those students are more accepted than the students who, like you said, have those higher incidence disabilities.
I would agree.
What about inhibitors to successful inclusion? What's standing in the way of this working more often?
I think the teachers are so overloaded with what they have to teach that the time isn't there to remove yourself from teaching the masses to go help with that other student or try to, differentiate to get that student to be a part of the full class. that's why I just see them always pushing them off on somebody else. And so I think that's one of the problems, is just time and the fear, same things fear factor and not knowing how to include them.
Okay. I would agree with that. Anybody else? Other things that stand in the way? Have you ever seen a principal who sets the tone for the whole school? And if a principal's not in favor of inclusive practices, there's just a trickle down that impacts the whole faculty?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I shared that last week, that 2 years ago, my principal
came in,
said that this is the way it's going to be, and there's no inclusion. You will pull out for the entire block of content time, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. And that can adversely affect the entire school and therefore the students.
Mm-hmm.
Meredith, have you seen any particular inhibitors to successful inclusion?
I think that definitely scheduling and staffing are some of the most difficult inhibitors when you're working a schedule and you have, especially in the elementary setting, we had requests that students, and it's best practices for students to be with their same age peers. And so if you have students kindergarten to fifth or in kindergarten to sixth in one setting that I was in, you've got kids going to specials all day long, taking your staff out of your room and decreasing safety for your other students. The same thing with lunches. Lunches span, we know, 2 to 3 hours at times, depending on your campus size. And then you've got more staff out of the room. And I happen to work in the Never Land of education, where I have almost one-to-one staffing for all of our significant needs students. But I've spent the majority of my career not living in that world, where I have maybe one aide for 8 to 9 students. And so that one aide is gone all day long. And then I have the rest of the students who have significant needs to teach the rest of the day. And that is something that I don't want to do. I might say, okay, y'all are all going to go to one class, or y'all are all going to go to the same lunch, because I need help. I need an instructional assistant because of my students. And so definitely scheduling and staffing and teacher acceptance. An anecdotal thing, I had one teacher I very distinctly remember, who was across the hall from me. She taught first grade. And after several months of fighting the inclusion battle, I said, okay, I'll move him to another class. He obviously, this is not the right fit, and I don't want to burden you any further. And she got so upset. And she became the best inclusion teacher I had ever seen. She differentiated every single lesson. She created stations in her room. She just was so terribly offended that I would say, okay, I guess you can't do it, in other terms, that she went off the deep end and became the best inclusion teacher I had ever seen. And so I wouldn't suggest that in a lot of settings, but really just, I would say, an empathy for the teacher to say, yes, I know this is a lot of work, but this is also your student and they're worth the work. And so I think that inherently as teachers, we want to be helpers and we want to serve students. And once they see that child as more than just another burden, just another number, then they really get the compassion level going, and I see just great outcomes for students.
I think we've got to get back to that that original thinking that all kids are general ed students first. That's the setting where everybody should begin, and then we work backwards from there. That's the least restrictive environment that we start with, and then we build services. That's everybody's first placement. And I think we've gotten to the point where we think if a child has a disability, well, then that other room is their room, and they get to come in here some, rather than exactly flipping that equation. So that's some change in thinking that we still have to work on.
Can I ask a question based on that?
Sure.
So does anyone or can anyone share their experience with how students are enrolled and who the teacher of record is? Because on my campus, any student that is in the life skills class and has significant needs, the teacher of record is the life skills teacher. They're never on any roster or class list for any general education class. In the district where I live, it's the opposite. The students who have more severe needs are on a gen ed teacher's class list. They are the teacher of record, but they just get services from the special ed teacher. Does anyone have any knowledge of how their campus does that?
What kind of campus are you on? Are you on elementary?
Elementary. Mm-hmm.
For the middle school that I was at, it was whoever the teacher was, it was who the teacher for record for that class period. So
Okay.
when I had the kids for history, they were mine. I was the teacher on record. Even though I was the gen ed teacher, I was the one that was responsible to make sure, and because I was 8th grade, it was my responsibility to prepare them for STAR and get them to pass STAR.
Mm-hmm. I ask this because I feel like that is a big, something that's in the way of a lot of teachers who are, have that fear or lack of knowledge or experience because they're like, well, I'm not their teacher. And I shared last week too that, when I would go pick up that 1st grade student, every time his teacher would say, oh, your teacher's here, and then send him on with me. And so I think that if we started out, like you were saying, they're gen ed students first. If they started out on a gen ed class list for whatever subject or whatever grade level, whatever period, and then just knowing that the special ed teacher is the service provider, I think we might, have some change of mentality a little bit from gen ed teachers.
I agree with
True.
you. Good point.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about communication. This would be chapter 11. Let's see here. The purposes of communication, some of the fundamental aspects of it. Communication is a social behavior. And those of you who have been in my diagnostician program, we've talked about this quite a bit, particularly as it relates to autism. And that's certainly true as the function of communication is to engage, of course, with others, enables interaction with others. It is produced by a variety of modes. We want to think about communication in that variety of contexts, and it should occur in those varieties of contexts. Therefore, interventions should be in those contexts and should be collaborative in nature. Interventions should modify physical and social environments. And so let's look at this next slide. You're going to see these terms on your quiz this week. The first one is intentionality. Let's talk a little bit about intentionality of communication. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity yet to look at the videos that accompany the resources for this week, but there's one about facilitated communication. And facilitated communication was a big thing a few years ago, and it's fallen into disfavor for pretty good reason. But the video that's posted about facilitated communication shows a number of people doing some hand over hand. I don't know if you'd really call it instruction, but it's facilitating a number of young people with more significant disabilities with keyboards and communication devices, and typing out sentences, messages, communication with others. And what's probably missing in those communication efforts is this particular bullet here, which is intentionality. If you don't have that intentionality of communication, you're missing that basic building block. If the person who's doing the communicating isn't attempting to communicate themselves, that facilitation of communication is really kind of a difficult effort on the part of the person who's doing the facilitation. And when you watch that video, I think you'll see that. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what's the intention of the communicator? Is that individual attempting to communicate? And if that's not their intention, then we don't have true communication going on. Behavior regulation is another term that's used here and in the chapter. That would be the intention of the person who's doing the communicating or the behavior. This is, as you get into behavioral terms, those of you who are behaviorists will know about this type of thing. This is requesting or rejecting something. What's the intention of that? And then making that intention very focused and pointed. Joint attention. This is something that we hear a lot about in the realm of autism. And that's where an individual can focus their attention in collaboration with another person. That's one of the markers for the presence of or the absence of autism. If an individual can engage in joint attention, that's usually an indicator that that autism is not present, at least in a high degree, because that's one of the things we look for in young children as they develop communication skills. Can they, or do they want to seek your attention? Bring a toy to you, show it to you, get your attention to show you how this particular toy operates. When they've created something artistically, do they want to share that with another child or with an adult? Do they want to share communicatively? Do they want to share in play, that kind of thing, with that joint attention? So that's what that particular term means. An ecological assessment, that's where we are looking at a child's behavior in a naturalistic setting. We're going to look at communication in a natural setting. We're going to listen and learn from a child in the environments in which we would find them on a daily basis. AAC, that's augmentative and alternative communication. A lot of people confuse this with assistive technology, and the two are not really interchangeable terms. Some sorts of assistive technology fall under augmentative and alternative communication devices, but they're really separate terms. Augmentative communication, that's when we add to what the child can already do, and we're going to supplement their communication ability with some sort of either a device or a method. Maybe sign language might be an example of that. The child is already establishing some means of communication, and we're going to supplement that. We're going to augment that with sign language. An alternative communication method or device might be a voice output device. If the child has no oral communication at all, we're going to give them an alternative to that by giving them a device that will give them a voice output when they don't have any. So that's what augmentative and alternative communication means. Preempting is another term that you'll see both in your book and on your quiz this week. And that's when we we get overly involved in the communication process by just exactly that, by preempting a child or a student in the process of learning communication. Let's say we're trying to teach them to make requests, and we put their toy down on the low shelf where they can always get to it. So we've preempted the opportunity to question and to ask us to request for that toy. Now, if we were to put it on a higher shelf, then that would encourage the requesting for that particular item. But by allowing it to be within reach, we have we've preempted their asking for that particular item. So we've inhibited their asking. We've preempted. So what we want to do is the flip side of that. We want to inhibit preempting. We want to not preempt. When we speak for children, when we put words in their mouths, when we finish sentences for them, those are all examples of preempting communication. So we want to not preempt. We want to inhibit preempting. Any of those jump out at you? Anybody want to add to any of those concepts?
Real quick, when I read the textbook, the thing that jumped out to me that I didn't really, it never hit me, it was kind of common sense, is trying to get kids to initiate communication. And that's a challenge because a lot of times they just want to sit and have people do stuff for them, but trying to get them to initiate. Mm-hmm. And the concept of the button that says, it's like they push it, I have something to say now, that gets the attention of somebody. I thought that's a clever idea.
Yeah.
but I would say that'd be hard to get them to do that. But
yeah. And for some kids, that's the most basic goal, is that initiation. That's the primary goal, is to initiate communication at all. Meredith, why don't you talk for a second about some of these issues in relation to the students in your classroom, either the current one or some of your past students with communication delays or issues?
I definitely have worked with a lot of students with communication delays. For the first 4 years of my teaching, I didn't have any students who were verbal. And I've had students mostly that are minimally verbal. And I have probably the most talkative students at this point, but many would not consider them functionally verbal. So this is my world, my realm. Communication is everything. Kind of going from towards the top, behavior regulation, as it relates to AAC. I think immediately of a student that I had that had a lot of really aggressive behaviors, no verbal speech, very little sign, and seemed to throw just about every communication device that we put before him. We finally found a communication device where he could type instead of just punching pictures, which at first I thought is ridiculous because I don't know that he knows how to spell. We haven't gotten to spelling because he won't even tell me, yes or no. And he was having kind of an aggressive day, and we spent a good bit of time really showing him this device that was primarily a typing device where he would be able to just let us know, just type out the words that he wants. And the first thing he wrote us was sick. And I was flabbergasted. I could not believe it. Sure enough, we took his temperature. It was about 102. He had an ear infection, and he just desperately needed to tell us that he was sick, and he'd been doing it with his fists all morning. And we finally got the right communication device. And then that really facilitates, he's in high school now. I had him in elementary, and he goes into general education classes, not necessarily to access curriculum, but behaviorally he is able to do that for a level of normalcy, and he still uses the same communication device. So it's really finding something that fits. It's a Springboard. And we had to really change, if you're not familiar with communication devices, you might not know that you can change how hard you hit it to how it will respond, because some people, especially students with autism, perseverate and will push the same button just to hear it make a sound, a letter or a certain word. And so you can change a lot of the different settings. There's so many different things out there. As far as AAC is concerned, I have done this for 10 years and I still see devices and apps that I haven't seen before. I actually was just able today to work with an eye gaze Dynavox, a Tobii Dynavox. And a Dynavox, if you're not familiar, is a voice output device that is many thousands of dollars, very complicated, and well, it can be very complicated or it can be very simple. And this student's severe orthopedic impairments, intellectually disabled, and was working her eye gaze device, and it was a thing of beauty. She was letting us know about her trip to Egypt recently with her family, and it was really amazing to see a student who can't control her limbs be able to communicate with us with no verbal speech. And so everywhere in between, including, picture communication, the picture exchange system, you might be familiar with PECS. That's a low-tech, no-tech AAC with just picture exchange. And then there's all different types of apps on the iPads. I have 3 different students on 3 different iPad apps. Just the one that fits their needs the best is what we end up with. And communication is just everything. You become, in a classroom like mine, you become best friends with the speech pathologist, and you just work and work and work until you find the right thing, whether that be verbal speech or an alternative. I think joint attention was on there as well, which is something that I frequently discuss and share with my paraprofessionals that I train, because a lot of times they might see me doing things that are a little strange. I might be singing along with an Elmo song, or I might be, playing with a fidget next to a student. And what I found over time with my students on the autism spectrum and intellectual disabilities is that if I start to get engaged with what they are interested in, then they are like, oh, someone else sees what I'm doing. Someone else cares about what I'm doing. Maybe I could care about what they're doing here next, in the next activity. But it takes me kind of inserting myself into their world, whether that be with a silly song or even just a sound that they're making, and just kind of letting them know I hear you. I see what you're doing. And I'd like to come alongside you and do something too. So, when people are like, you're not afraid to be silly, even in the high school setting, that's what I have to be able to do, because I want them to know that I see them, and that we can pay attention to the same thing. Obviously, with students on the autism spectrum, they're known for being in their own worlds. And so if I can stick my foot in the door and then bring them out a little bit, that's always really worked well for me. That may help in a diagnostician setting, you being able to connect with kids that are difficult to connect with, just finding that little toy that they're playing with, or tune they're singing, and being able to connect there. So
thank you, Meredith.
The same thing with preempting. I do that constantly. We just flat out call it sabotage. We sabotage them in every way possible, and so we don't ever give them utensils to work with. They always have to ask if they're going to complete their work. We don't ever mention lunch. They have to ask to go to the lunchroom. And lots of different things in that kind of in that kind of setting, where they don't have a ton of motivation necessarily to speak to me if they're getting a lot of their needs met internally. And so every opportunity I can, we always lock the bathroom door, even though it's in our room. So they have to ask for the key, and lots of little things like that. It might seem tedious, but really facilitating any opportunities is worth it.
It's good.
Big picture.
What'd you say, Michelle?
It's taking into consideration the big picture and not just the moment. It's easier to open the door for them. It's easier to go, okay, let's go to lunch. Those things are easy.
Yeah.
But when you're doing what Meredith is talking about, you're actually teaching them versus learned helplessness and things like that.
Absolutely. That's right. I think this next slide, that's a PEC system right there, isn't it?
Well, it's an app on an iPad.
Okay. Let's move on, because we're running a little short on time now. Let's move on into behavior. I think most of you have had the behavior class. My students, I think, have all of you had the behavior class now? Jessica, you've had it. Tara, have you?
I don't think I've had it yet.
Mark, you'll have it next spring. Michelle, you don't need it. Anybody else? Donna, you're not taking that, are you?
No, I don't think so.
If you need another class, you can pick that one up. It's good. But if you've already had that behavior class, then this is, 101 to you. But an FBA, an attempt to identify functional relationships between environmental events and the occurrence of occurrence or non-occurrence of target behaviors. You all know the ABCs of FBA. So functions of problem behavior. The function is to get something sometimes, or the function may be to avoid sometimes, or it could be both. So we've got some verbiage here that the book uses, and the book actually uses some terminology that's a little bit dated. Meredith, why don't you talk a little bit about some more, and Michelle, this being your area of expertise, did you notice this in the book, that some of the terminology is a little dated?
Yeah, but it is, except in most research, it's still saying the same things. So it still uses the ABCs and the forms and functions of behavior. It's still very similar across the research as to what our textbook said too.
Meredith, why don't you talk a little bit about what you and I discussed, okay?
Well, I definitely didn't learn this in my undergrad, which I was very thankful for my undergrad. I wish I had learned this earlier, but
you also have a master's degree in special ed too.
I also have a master's degree, yes, in autism intervention, and somewhere along the way, a behavior specialist sat me down, and this is old hat for y'all, but attention-seeking behavior is a term that you're going to hear constantly in my world, because that's what we get a lot of, a whole lot of attention-seeking behavior, and I say that a lot in my children. Attention-seeking behavior. I apply all these behavioral concepts to my family. If you don't, you probably should. It's really helpful reinforcement. Attention-seeking behavior, escape avoidance behavior, seeking a tangible reinforcer, and sensory in my world, absolutely. And obviously sensory is not only students with autism. If you are freezing cold in church, you're not necessarily listening. If your sensory needs are not being met, then you are also, we're all guilty of it. that we have to have our sensory needs met as well. If something smells terrible, then you might be showing a few maladaptive behaviors. But definitely looking at things that way. And what I spoke to Dr. Kavin about was I hate to look at problem behaviors without saying how to help those problem behaviors. And as you know, we have some behavior specialists in our midst. I'm sure y'all are very used to, when a behavior is attention seeking, you front load attention. I used to be a trainer for crisis prevention and intervention, the CPI program. And down here they do SAMA. So just be aware wherever you are, they do something different. But within one of those trainings, I said, we've got to front load attention seeking behaviors. And I saw these light bulbs go up in educators of so many years. They were like, I will not reinforce that attention seeking behavior. I will not give it attention. I know it's attention seeking. And that may very well be true. But the way to make it not happen the next day is we go ahead and say, hey, come on over. Let's have a chat. I'd love to give you some of my attention. With one of my students, I front load attention seeking every single morning so that then we can work. And he likes to discuss what color shoes I'm wearing, the pattern, what type, if they lace or whatever. And if I'm in a meeting or something, then the rest of the morning it's, excuse me, I need to talk about your shoes. So front loading attention seeking with escape avoidance, we know we need to let them know how much time until you get to escape. I have a student who parents said he will not sit for longer than a minute anywhere we are in public. And we started with a timer, and we started with 2 minutes. Now we're up to 20 minutes. He'll sit in a restaurant or, wherever we are, as long as he has a timer counting down how long it is until he gets to get up. We're at 20 minutes now in just a few months. And so escape avoidance, attention seeking, tangible, obviously asking appropriately for a tangible when they want that specific food, a lot of time, tangible reinforcer food, or if they're looking for a specific toy or something, they've got to ask for it, they've got to work for it. And then sensory, again, meeting sensory needs, having a way for them to communicate their sensory needs. And definitely the basics of behavior are applicable in any classroom, any setting, whether it be your home or wherever it is. So that's my world.
Okay, thanks on that. Michelle, do you have anything you want to add on that from your perspective?
No, just dealing with behavior, the most important thing that I see is consistency, because all those things that Meredith said, if somebody does them for a week and then stops, it's no good. Or if you do it Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, you don't feel good, and then Thursday you have to reteach it all over. So consistency with behavior is such a huge piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have experiences with these things that you'd like to add? How about questions? Comments?
Are we able to ask questions about assignments, or do you want it strictly about the lesson so far?
Let's do lesson right now, and then we'll do assignments, okay? Any other questions or comments about the discussion tonight or any of the chapters? Okay, then let's move into any questions about the assignments.
I was just curious on how we're going to do a group project. I haven't taken a lot of online classes, but
yeah.
Online and not being near somebody, or
you'll do it online. I'll have a thing on our webinar next week where we talk about that, and if you're not on the webinar, you can look at it later and we'll discuss it. Did you say something, Meredith?
Yeah, I texted you something.
Do I might? Oh, no, everybody can see it. I better.
Yep.
Oh, okay. You can hop off now. Yes, you may. Thank you very much. I appreciate your expertise.
Bye.
Aren't you glad that I can call you an expert now?
Oh, yes.
We all saw that though.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Meredith.
Huh.
Mark Mitchell
Yes.
out here teaches at Western Hills.
What?
Yeah.
Cougars.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right. Go Cougars.
Alum right
That's right.
here.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah. Yes.
That's cool.
Yep.
Okay. Bye,
Okay.
Meredith.
That's right. Oh,
Time.
she's
Bye.
I got to finish my class. Go. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, Michelle, back to your question. Right this minute, this is the first semester I've taught this class. And so I'm winging it a little bit. So this weekend, I'm going to figure out how we're going to do those group projects. And by next week, I'll know. How's that?
I'm good with that. I'm okay with that. I just was I wanted to kind of start working on it, but I was like, oh, I don't want to do it by myself.
No, you're not doing it by yourself. I'll give you people to work with.
I'm doing it by myself, but I really want it to be a group. So
you'll have somebody to work with by next week, and all the parameters will be laid out by next week. And so you'll have plenty of time to do the group project, because by then we'll all know what we're doing, okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? And I'm going to start grading papers tomorrow now that I'm back from my trip. I promise I'll have things graded this week.
Dr. Cavan, I know you're not a stickler for format or anything, but on our choice assignment, do you want, on assignment A, do you want the paragraphs to be double spaced with reference page and all that?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. But you know I'm not a stickler.
I know you're not.
Okay. That's not going to be a deal breaker for me.
Okay.
I'm looking more at content and that kind of thing. All right, other questions? Thank you all for your participation tonight. I'm going to post this. I think I do have it recorded tonight, so we'll get it posted. Thank you all, though, for participating. You enriched the discussion tremendously. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Dr. Cavan,
Yes.
can we stay on since this is the first time to meet you?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, everybody else, are you off?
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, Sean. You didn't say a word tonight, but good to see you. Okay, Michelle, let me stop the recording, okay?
Okay.
Hold on.